Welcome to Dungeon Master Deep Dive. I'm Mason Edwards, Dungeon Master of Arcane Adventures. In today's episode, we're going to discuss the ending of a campaign and how to give a great and final conclusion to the story, the players, and the adventure. So, without further ado, let's dive in. Conclusions are necessary. After months or years of playing through a story and adventure in real life, in a world with your friends at a table, there comes a point when that quest has to be completed. The bad guy has been slayed, the backstory plots have been dealt with, and the characters have grown and matured. They're now ready to turn the page and begin the next chapter of their lives. And that is where the end becomes of great importance, because there is a lot to navigate throughout the closing of a campaign. Various things to consider to create a good conclusion that leaves you and your friends satisfied with how it ended and ready to start something new. Our goal today is to walk through the process of writing a good conclusion to a campaign and how to let a good story come to a good ending. A good conclusion. A good conclusion ties up the loose ends of the campaign, both the plots of each character as they tie up this chapter of their lives, and for the greater story of the party. A good conclusion ties up the quote-unquote loose ends, but it doesn't necessarily have to tie all of them up. Additionally, it has to be satisfying. It doesn't necessarily need to be big, but it does need to be logical, or at the very least, a true resolution to the problem. If the big bad has been defeated, then ask yourself and everyone at the table, what comes next? Now, characters grow a lot during the events of a campaign. Sometimes, even just one event, one session, is enough to create a character growth arc and completely change a person. So as characters learn more about themselves, they engage with the world around them, they complete their quest, both the party quest and their own private quest, and many other things that the average person, the NPCs in a TTRPG world, don't get to do. The adventure in your campaign is not the end of that character, just the end of that chapter in their lives, assuming the party lived through whatever climactic event awaited for them at the end of your adventure. So, the world almost ended. How does society rebuild? A great villain was stopped. How do opinions about that person change? A huge secret was revealed. How does the world react? A mystery was solved. What things are still waiting to be uncovered? A character didn't make it through the end. How do we mourn them? The world will never be the same, regardless of how your story concludes, no matter how big or small. That's the beauty of the game. Letting the party, the players, make real differences in a game they have spent months and months playing together. So what comes next is a group effort, deciding what epilogue, if any, comes after those final moments, and gives the story a goodbye that it so much deserves. Up next, we'll talk about a few ways that you can go about having that epilogue, and what that might look like depending on the campaign. A few ways to sign off. There are a number of ways you can go about the ending of a campaign, but no matter what you pick, it takes teamwork to get it done. It's a good idea for both the players and the Dungeon Master to have a rough idea of how the ending will go, what that ending is. Obviously, the Dungeon Master tends to know more about the ending than anyone else, but that doesn't mean to cut the players out of the equation altogether. My personal favorite and preferred way to go about this is to have a session dedicated to the conclusion, not the final fight. That session already happened, but one more session after that. However, you don't have to do that, as we'll soon discuss. However, regardless of your method, make it a point to include the player's own thoughts and ideas into the conclusion, letting them leave one final mark before they turn over their characters and close this chapter. For the rest of the video, let's talk about the various methods of concluding a story. Number 1, a loose end. We talked earlier about a conclusion striving to tie up loose ends in a logical way that promotes satisfaction of finally seeing the big picture. It's like when you put that final piece of a puzzle together, and suddenly what was once so difficult to imagine, broken into thousands of pieces, is now one complete art. But also discussed before, you don't have to tie up every loose end. In fact, you can leave a thread or two open, which prompts a sense of unknown that can hook players to coming back for another game. Matthew Mercer did this in Campaign 2, when he revealed that Keyleth's mother was actually still alive all this time, and he revealed this to the Mighty Nine. In Campaign 1, spoilers if you didn't already know, Vox Machina knew that Keyleth's mother had gone off for her Aramente, and had yet to return, leaving everyone, especially Keyleth, to wonder if her mother was even alive. And if she was alive, where was she? Matt did not answer that question at the end of Campaign 1. He held on to that thread, and he brought it up years later in a totally different campaign. But in that moment, when it was finally revealed, the faces on everyone at the table were shock and disbelief. In this loose end methodology, it's all about tying up the necessary threads, but leaving threads open just enough to keep your players wondering. The idea is that even at the end of the game, players might not yet have the full picture. They might not have finished the whole puzzle. Characters may still have questions for their past, things unexplained, things yet to discover. And this mentality to find out that whole picture, to finish that puzzle, can serve as the driving mindset for what a character does when the main story is over. It keeps the players hooked on uncovering secrets. Number 2, cliffhanger. The cliffhanger conclusion makes one final big revelation and then cuts the story there. Like finding out that someone else was behind the big bad's plans, or uncovering that someone's entire childhood was a complete lie. Positioning a big reveal at the end of the campaign is a cinematic way to captivate players and leave them with one burning question: what happens next? The beauty of the cliffhanger, compared to many of the other methods we'll talk about, is that it likely doesn't require as much work, but it can still be just as impactful. All you really need to do is throw out a bit of information that will hook the players, and then end the session and the game as a whole on that edge. Alternatively, a cliffhanger can answer a burning question for one or more players, but give them just enough of an answer to have even more questions than before. Mainstream media, like television, movies, and novels, are experts in this area of narrative, leaving the audience on the edge of their seats, just waiting and wondering what might be the next step. Or maybe a big plot twist keeps everyone holding on tight for the next season or chapter of whatever world this is in. Number 3, up to the imagination. If you opt out of the conventional means of a conclusion, then leaving it open for thought is an alternative that might be good for you. In this instance, your party has just stopped the big bad, and now they can finally return home and retire from adventuring. That's it. That's the conclusion. It requires probably the least amount of preparation, but it also has a cost, often not being as impactful as the other methods. It allows the audience and the players to say, well, I like to think that this happened, or in my opinion, this is what happened after the events of the campaign. But it also deprives them of real answers. Of course, letting everyone have their own interpretation can be advantageous. It can even be fun, if done right. Letting everyone have a headcanon for the events that take place post-campaign. But if done wrong, it can leave players and the audience with a bad taste. So, is it an option? Absolutely yes. But do take caution if you go this route. Make sure to avoid a pitfall, and make sure that the audience still gets some answers. Number 4, Player's Choice. My personal favorite is the epilogue session, where players and GM collaborate on the ending. The Game Master asks each player's character individually, what is next for you? And the players are given a lot of power to choose and shape the world based on those choices. This type of ending works best for time skips, where the events post-campaign happen over a lengthy period of time, such as weeks, months, or even years. The more time that the players have, that they know that they have, the more they can influence the world, especially high-level players. Players might have their characters go off and get married, raise a family. They might open a business, start a new job. They might pick up new hobbies, or they might even retire to a peaceful home in the countryside. But whatever their choices may be, this type of ending gives the control, mostly, in the hands of the players. Of course, the Game Master can always put stipulations and or limitations, usually within reason or requiring a plan to accomplish world-defining moments, on these choices. You can't just have a character say, well, I'm going to go off and hunt down the big bad that escaped and kill him. Well, maybe that player now needs to come up with a reasonable plan. But even if they do come up with like that, they might not know if they succeed or fail. Regardless, I like to give my players a moment in the spotlight to act with a semblance of authority like a game master for their final moments playing a character. Like I said earlier, obviously, if players choose to have their characters embark on a new and difficult task, they might not know if they succeed or fail. So it leaves some wiggle room to come back and patch the holes later with more gameplay. Number 5, Setup. If you and your group know in advance that you will be playing another campaign prior to the conclusion of your current one, then it can be fun and even beneficial to use the ending of this campaign to also kickstart the adventures of the next one. Let's just take, for example, a pretty typical example. If each one of the player's characters for the first campaign goes off and has children, then the next campaign could follow the events and actions of those children trying to find their place in the world. Now, that's a very surface level idea, but you get the point. It can always be fun to have old player characters make cameo appearances in a new story. Or perhaps the big bad was actually not defeated, even though the main adventurers from the first campaign thought that they did defeat him. In a recent campaign I played in, my character was part of a group of adventurers that thought they defeated this super powerful monster. But 30 years later, it turns out that such monster actually survived and was still wreaking havoc like he did all those years ago. Now, my character and a bunch of new characters have embarked on a new adventure to actually stop this monster once and for all. We didn't actually have a campaign and play through those events before this campaign started. They were just tidbits in my backstory. But who's to say that it couldn't have been that way? We could have played a whole campaign with that old party, and then my character is the only one who returned to continue the fight in this new group. Or, as it has been said already, another one could be an NPC that the DM uses to move this new story along. Letting the first campaign build up and pave part of the road for the second campaign. And that could be a good tool in your world to help you continue the story. Number 6, combo moves. And of course, The best for last. The most difficult one of all, but also perhaps some of the best endings, are the ones that take the most thought and time to fully flesh out. Combinations of the previous options. Using two or more of these tricks in tandem can add suspense, satisfaction, and surprise to the conclusion of the story, and it can leave players ready to play again to uncover more and more in the game world. A cliffhanger could also be a loose end, and could also be a setup for the next story in the world. So the sky's the limit when it comes to writing a good conclusion. But don't forget that it is critically important to include the players in on the ending, as that is the best way to let everyone walk away from the game table knowing that the story was good, that it resolved well, and that there is still so much more to be learned. With all of these tips and tricks on how to write a good conclusion, a list of reasons why you need a good one, and an infinite possibility for conclusions to any story, keep the end in mind throughout your game, and don't be afraid to say goodbye at the end. Perhaps it isn't the end at all. That's all the time we have for today on Dungeon Master Deep Dive. We'll see you next time.